I had a vehicle stolen from me here when I was down home there. And I had a young policeman down, and he came in and was looking all around. We couldn't find it. My van with all my stuff was in it. It was gone the next morning. So he came in and sat down like that, and he said, well, I'll get my tape out and we'll tape. And I said, okay. He said, what do you want, where do you want me to start? Start at the beginning. Oh, okay. I was born July the 2nd, 1928. Oh, no! We did find the truck. Somebody borrowed it that night because it was pouring and raining, and they sat all day up under a lady's tree. Never touched a thing in the van at all. It just,
Really?
the tool kit was there. And the whole thing was loaded with tools. Never took a thing. They
Really?
just wanted to drive from Maitland to South Maitland. I was born down in Lower Selma in 1928, July the 2nd. And lived there not all my life. I lived in East Hants all my life, and lived in Lower Selma, Selmah, and Maitland. So I was 3 places. Lived there, married, lived in Selmah 15 years, and then moved to Maitland and built my business and store up there. I had my parents are Philip and Ruth Miller, and Ruth Anthony. She was an Anthony. Not the Anthony's in Kinnickle, but another Anthony's down in Windsor, and that area right there was the Anthony Shipyard, right by the park and Provincial Park there. That belonged to my Anthony family, and they donated that land to the government if they would make a park there. My dad was born out in Northfield to the Miller family out there. I don't know much about my grandparents. But he was born there with his families, and he met my mom somehow out on the shore from East. That's a long haul way back then from Northfield clear out to Lower Selma. So he met her, and they were married and started a family. He then moved immediately back to Lower Selma and they purchased the mom's dad's property, which was 400 acres of woodland and 20 or so acres of cleared land. And that park area right there is where the Anthony property went right down to the shore, over about 500 feet. It went right back from the shore, right back to the woods, encompassing about 400 and some acres all told. He bought that and then started farming. And it was a hard road, and he no sooner got up and running when he lost his big barn, and we truly believe it was arson. He said he remembered having an argument with a guy out on the road 2 days before that. Heated argument. Well, Dad is a big guy, and the other guy is a smaller guy. So nothing happened there. 2 nights later, at midnight, the big barn, 100 feet long and full of hay, full of machinery and stuff, and he was over there trying to, at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I can remember seeing that. I was 3-year-old at the time. And so he kept on farming and cutting wood to pay for this and that, and then the children came along, and eventually there were 10 of us, and 5 at any one time at home, and everybody worked on the farm, and everybody worked. Everybody had stuff to do. You had time to play and go to school and stuff, but we knew that if you want to eat, you got to get out in the garden. He had a little bit of everything. He didn't have a big dairy farm. We only had about 8 cattle, 2 horses, pigs, hens, no goats, that type of a farm. And we grew up poor. We didn't know we were poor. Our family didn't know. He probably knew. We didn't know we were poor. We had enough to eat and a place to stay all the time, and you just never thought about being poor. But the majority of the people up and down the shore at that time were poor, in a sense. Until that was initially. And then after in 1941, the American Naval Base got a job there as mechanic, and he was there for 5 years. And it just jumped from that of us getting along, and Dad was making a living, keeping us from starving. And then all of a sudden the war broke out, and he had 5 year job over there. So we lived up here now. Cause I don't know what he got, but he got pretty good pay. Treated with royalty. He was a motor man, and they needed a man in the worst way. The guys that all came down there to work in the Naval Ordnance Laboratory didn't know how to turn a nut off a wheel or put one back on. But they were smart, every one of them were smart, and they were there for a particular reason, testing bombs. So that lasted 5 years, and then they immediately, all the tools that they had over at the naval base, the guy said, "We want you to get rid of these. I don't want it, we're going back, I'm gonna come back in the spring. I don't want to see that stuff here." So he was able to muster up a lot of just about everything, the welding torches, the gears, the voices, chain falls, and anything that was there. They said, if you don't get it, it's going in the bay. And that's what they did. They brought a scow from Hantsport with a tugboat, took it down to the wharf, right down below that's where the wharf was, and they loaded that stuff with just everything you can imagine, and put the dozer on with it, went down off of Minersville or somewhere where the tide doesn't really go out there, pushed it all overboard. Everything. Jeeps, and said they had a lot of parachutes, nylon parachutes. Christ, they were half as big as this room. And they said, we can't dump those in the water. That'll kill the fish. It'll just upset. We can't anything that won't sink, we can't put it in there. So they dug a big hole down next to the wharf there. I can remember where it was. I didn't see how big it was, but they trucked down there parachutes and all kinds of plastics, of the plastic covers on the bombs and one thing. That all went in that hole and covered over. Still there today, luckily. Dad's brain was wheels and gears. Left school when he was probably 6-year-old or 6-year-old, grade 6, grade 7 or something like that, out of necessity to go to work. But he had a vehicle, and one of the things that he made was when they used to take ice from the mill pond in Maitland down to the creamery. They'd take ice down there and load it in all winter. In the wintertime, for all summer when they needed it for cooling cream. He designed and made, in his whatever way it was, 3 or 4 cylinder engine, maybe only 2, but had runners on it, and a saw, like a wood saw, it was about that tall, and put a shaft through with a belt up onto this, something that he could raise and lower, or tilt it like this, handle up and down, took it up there, and they were sawing ice with a thing like this up and down, and they'd be there all winter just trying to get enough ice for there, plus other people. He went up with this and put the saw, let's say they sawed a hole there, and then started going back and forth this way, about this far apart, about 15 feet long or 20 feet long, and then he'd reach out there just as far as at the edge of that. He wouldn't saw there and saw the ice down like that. And oh my God, and just hauled those things out in a half a day. They had 3 truckload or 3 wagon sled loads of ice going, and before they'd do 1. And in the morning he had about 3 of them loaded to go to the different places. The ice cakes are about that square and probably that deep, right down to the water. Just grabbed them, pulled them out, and loaded them on the sleds. Away they went. Yeah, that was stuff that he could do. He took the generator off of a car, an old car that he had, before we had electricity, and we had that in 1938. And before that, he geared up a generator out on the roof of the building over there, 12 volt, no, the 6 volt then. Made a windmill, put a pulley down on it to turn this, and had a nice little light down in there to work with a bulb. And he used that to, so that's the thing that was going on in his head. Always a jump ahead of anybody else at sea. Yeah, he was a worker. He was strong as a bull and never hardly idle. When he was all through at the naval base, he started his own garage, and for 55 years he ran a garage like Ed Annan's in Maitland, or some of the back garages that are not super duper good. It was he didn't have glass, he didn't sell gas and stuff like that, but he fixed cars for 50 some years. He taught himself to weld, acetylene, and then he finally had MIG welder, I think, or something like that. He did a lot of brass welding, fixing cars up in the trunks and underneath the fenders. Made a great job of them and worked his heart out for practically nothing. My granddad, I hardly knew him. Dad's father, I hardly knew them. They lived out in Northfield. We were out there and very seldom you ever saw them. It was just a visit for the weekend and that was it. My mom's dad moved to Windsor, Andrew Anthony, on Gary Street in Windsor. And he lived his life out there. And I was fortunate enough when I got through at the naval base the last year, I went down to stay at my granddad's to finish up high school at the Windsor Academy. And then I came home from there on Thursday afternoon, and on Saturday at night, 5 o'clock, I was aboard an Imperial oil tanker. And I went there for 4 years on the oil tankers. The cook there got me on because he was my cook out at the naval base, Sven Johnson, a Swedish guy. And he called up my mother and said, Merrill's through school, we need somebody in here. You tell him, get the hell in here. He said, you get him in there, he has to go over and down on Emperor Oil in Dartmouth, and there'll be somebody waiting, looking for him at 5 o'clock on Saturday night. So that happened. It was a long trip for me to get into Halifax. Dad took me over from Lower Selma to Shubenacadie to catch a bus. Roads were rough and dirt and gravel, no pavement. Got on the bus from there and went to Dresden Row in Halifax. Got on the trolley car, went down to the George Street to the ferry. Went across the ferry and take a bus from there out to Emperor Oil. And that was all new to me. But he told me how to get there, and he said there'd be somebody ready to pick you up. I was in 46. I finished school in June 46, and then 3 days later I was aboard a boat. And that's where I stayed for 4 years. I made 4 or 5 trips down to Venezuela for oil. Caracas in Venezuela, big oil fields down there. We went up the Carapita River, and the ship was down there was about 700 feet long. That's small now because they were breaking two in the middle in there, and they said you make them smaller or you have to make them bigger. The swell of the ocean was such that 1,100 feet there would always be 2 waves under. The other way there was one there, and there was nothing here.
So it was split
Finally broken two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Say,
my mom stayed at home. She was a home-body woman. Had 10 children, so you can understand that why she was home. She didn't have time to run around.
Yeah.
But people didn't visit and didn't have the opportunity to travel around way back then. Five here, and as I left before the last 3 or 4 were born. I was the 3rd one down. My oldest is dead, and my sister just died last year, and I'm 95. I'll be 96 in July 2nd. I remember going back in the woods with my dad when he cut logs, and he'd cut a whole whack of them one winter to pay the bills and sell it to the sawyer down in Old Shore. And the sawyer would say, "Oh, well, you only had so many thousand." He said, "No, there was more than that." Well, that's all that was on the scoreboard, was that many thousand, and so this is all I want to pay you for. And the house is still there if you drive down by the park. When you go down by there sometime, it's the first house this side, toward Maitland side, only about 200 or 300 feet from the park entrance. That was my granddad's house, Anthony. My dad bought it from Mom's dad. When he packed out and went to Windsor, he bought the Anthony property. Great big house with an L on it, the kitchen. And it was a cold house, but we got insulation in the attic after a while. The walls were never insulated, even to this day, I'm not sure. And the house was comfortable. It's hardwood floor in the dining room, and a big bay window that didn't look to the bay, but it was over to the park. We had 1, 2, 3, 2 big bedrooms upstairs, a small bedroom, and another bed off the head of the stairway where you got up and around. There's a place there you could have a bed. So we, and Mom and Dad, after a while, moved downstairs and stayed down there. So that gave us bedrooms upstairs with 2 beds in that bedroom, 1 in this bedroom, 2 beds in that room. And we didn't have an indoor toilet, but we had a toilet on the end of we didn't have a bathroom at that time, no flush or anything. So we had to go through the woodhouse, way out to the end and use the toilet out there. An outside toilet, but it was inside. Other people, of course, had the old outhouse 40 feet away. And we had a furnace, but the furnace was a wood furnace. And up until I got old enough to understand the theory of movements of air, etc., the cold air came out of the bottom of the furnace and came up in a box like that and then went right outdoors. You can't get cold air in if there's no place for this air to go.
Right, yeah.
So the only one, the register that ever worked was the one right over top of the furnace. We'd all gather over that and get warm. We'd go to a beautiful run-through wood stove that kept us warm. And eventually we had a waterfront on the stove and a tank behind and a hot and cold tap in the kitchen. And that was a blessing in disguise, I tell you. We moved ahead about 40 years, I think. But we did have running water in the house, and very few people did. We were fortunate that my granddad, in his lifetime, dug a trench out across the highway and away to devil up the hill. I imagine it was 500 feet, but it happened to be probably 30 or so feet high, higher than there, so the gravity gave us a little bit of pressure, and it was a 3/4 pipe, galvanized pipe. And that lasted for oodles until it finally leaked. And when I got old enough and went to work and started doing stuff, one of the things I did was have a number. I was in the plumbing business, and I had a well drilled for my mom and dad by Baird's well drilling over in Debert.
Yeah.
And we drilled a beautiful well. I had 5 or 7 wells drilled all told for my people that I worked for. I turned out to be a certified electrician, a plumber, install furnaces. I like to do that. Service calls and radio and technician. I went to Toronto and stayed up there for most of the winter and got my certificate for electronics, and that's before, just when television was first coming on. When I came back, I built my store and worked there for 35 years before I sold that. And I was busy all the time. We were not lazy. I don't remember the first time. I remember sitting alongside of it when the Moose River gold mine scenario happened. Do you remember anything about that?
Yeah.
The guy from Halifax broadcast out of there. I knew his name, but it escapes me right at the moment. He stayed there 24 hours a day until those guys get out of the mine. And we could hear that on the radio, him broadcasting out from Moose River Gold Mine down to Lower Selma. I don't know how far the radius went, but yeah, that was one of the first times I remember. And then the music, and then there was old time music, Don Messer and so things like that we really enjoyed. There was no garbage or junk on the radio like the TV there. Sometimes I don't even want to watch it. I spent all winter up in Toronto studying about it. But I was up there when I went up, there wasn't any station in Halifax, but Moncton was on. Moncton was on before Halifax. So I was in his infancy and came back and started going all over the place. I was the only guy that knew anything about televisions, and so they were starting to pop up all over the place. And I was over in West Gore, up in Elmsdale, up in Chivy, down in Knoll and Burncoop, doing servicing on televisions. Put up towers, put up antennas, dug the hole and built the tower, a big tower with the rotor on the top. Because Moncton was here and Halifax was over there, they couldn't get them both. They had two antennas, or one, but they could turn around. So I built and installed them, a guy and myself. We climbed the ladder, had a safety belt, and went up there and had a gin pole and pulled the stuff all up and bolted them on, keep on going up, bolted on in 10-foot lengths. Donald was the only one that would be old enough at that time. The war was over in 1945 and I was just finishing school. And next year I finished 46, because with 45 we were coming home from school. And they said, the war's over, and we threw our books all in the air. And so in 46, when I finished down there, I went right back there, so we didn't see anything about the war. We had ration stamps. I remember well about the ration stamps. You had to get sugar and every tea and just about everything you bought with ration stamps. If somebody died over there, it'd be 3 weeks before you knew about it, because there were no phones too much going back and forth, and no way to get there except coming back by ship or so. The word would come back. So we didn't lose anybody, but up and down the shore there was quite a few of them lost, naturally. Yes, there was quite a few. We had a plaque in Maitland and South Maitland and Knoll Shore and Knoll, a plaque on the wall with all the people's names from that area that served and lost and got killed in the First World War. We had a list of them about that long in Maitland. Up in South Maitland was the same. I'm sure Chivy had the same. And Knoll and Kennecook, they all had names. So a lot of them didn't come back, but that was before my time. Lower Selma with an H. Pat Whitten said no, it didn't have an H. I said it did have an H. We'll get into a hustle over that. I was smiling about it. She sent me a piece a little later, documented in 18-something that had Lower or Selma, SELMA, and I showed her something that I had written from, on the ship in 47 to my mom in Lower Selma, SELMAH, and she looked at it and said, well, yeah, I know, but it didn't. And so before that we found out that they did have an H on it. And Selma, Sterling Brook wasn't there at that time, so I'm saying it was Lower Selma and Upper Selma. Then they dropped the upper off and just called it Selma. Then they dropped the H off. My mom was very adamant about us making damn sure that we spelled it with an H. Why? I don't know. What's the difference? Sterling Brook is there now, and I think what happened that they put these post offices in every district. In Maitland, they had a post office from around there, and then they went to Sterling Brook, or Selma, and that was down at the store in Selma, where Cullewa used to have the store, where the big church is in Selma. big steeple on it. Down over the hill at the right, there's a big building there right next to the road, and that was the store, and it had a gas pump. And then the next place was Selmah, and they called it Upper Selmah, but then they said, well, we can't call this Selmah, not Upper Selmah. We'll call that Sterling Brook. And that was a land grant to Sterling from the First World War somehow. And so this was Sterling, Mr. Sterling, they called it Sterling Brook. And they had a post office in Sterling Brook. And that's where Cox Brothers Farms are now, that perimeter around there. And then the next one was Lower Selma. The next one was Knoll Shore. East Knoll, Knoll, Minesville, everyone had a post office, usually always in a house. You'd go in and she'd have the mail all sorted out on her kitchen table. The mail would come in the bag, and in the morning she'd come back, have it there, you go home at noon hour in the afternoon, pick out your mail here and away you go. Oh, a great place to be. I didn't know any different. I know, way back then, you don't know any different. Everybody, I would have to say everybody was friendly. Very seldom there was any problems. Once in a while there was, and the policeman would come down and you'd call him, he'd be down 3 or 4 days to see what was going on. A lot of farms. From Shubenacadie to Walden, I bet there was 100 farms. Now you can count them in one hand. Starting with up in Shubby with Van der Ries, and then the next one was in Urbania, but I think that's closed. The next farm is in East and Old Shore, McClellan's, and then Bruce, the Dutch people that took over the Dinsmore, or the farm out on the point, I guess it was Dinsmore's. Gilmore, McClellan's, and then I don't think there was a big farm from there to Tinnegate. So that store had everything. Horseshoe nails and collars and bras and clothing and good shoes, old shoes, work boots, rubber boots, feeds for cattle and hens, and just whatever you needed, it was in the store. And just over by my store, where my store is, right down by the post office there, that's what I built there, that was a big blacksmith shop, and they did all kinds of blacksmith shops for the horses. I think there were 2 or 3 blacksmith shops up and down the shore. I took our horses, Dad sent me up when I was probably 9 or 10 years old with a pair of horses 5 miles and let him shoe the horses, and then I gave him a note, and I don't know what it was, I didn't read it, but before I came home, the guy in the store came over and put a box of groceries on. So the note must have been for him to go over and tell the storekeeper to put some groceries in, and he'd pay him whenever. I couldn't even unharness the horse, so it wasn't big enough, but that was all looked after, and they understood. The guy unhooked the horses and took them in and took the harness off and shod every horse, or shod 8 of them, 8 feet, and away we came back home. Electricity, paved roads, fewer farms, many more personal enterprises, fewer and fewer newborns. People, the children, instead of growing up and up and up and up, they were minimal. Because we were so used to dirt roads. And then all of a sudden we had a paved road, and I couldn't believe it. We'd get out and we danced on the pavement. I was driving a car, so it would be after I was 16, let's say in 1950, 55, somewhere in the 50s, 55 maybe or so. They paved the road from Knoll to Maitland, and then they paved it from Maitland to South Maitland, and they paved it from South Maitland up almost to Shubby, but then the next year they started Shubby, and then we had pavement from Shubby all the way to Walton, and that was just like a godsend. that ended the horses on the pavements. Now we had cars, old cars and trucks, tied together with hot hay wire. The tie rod would fall off and they'd get hay wire, or rubber bands off of tubes. The first wooden school right where it is now, all it is now is brick. The plumber from West Gore was over there working, and the school was insulated with seaweed. So he was working upstairs with Ralph Anthony. Ralph was the caretaker. And whatever they were doing, they had the torch out and doing this and this. And Ralph said, well, it's come dinner time. Come on over, just over the hill there by the church. Had their dinner and came back, and they opened the door and went in. Jesus, the smoke was all over the place. They went up the stairs like this, and the smoke was right down about that level with the floor. And there was no fire. So they called Kennecott, and they came up with the truck and water buckets and stuff like this. To make a long story short, 5 hours later the place caught fire and burned. They had no Scott packs, and they smoldered and smoldered and smoldered, and it couldn't get going because it didn't have enough oxygen, I suppose. So when they started smashing windows out, they opened up the air, and the thing took off, and it burned that whole friggin' school from one end to the other. We never got to university. None of us ever got to university, but I had one sister that was a teacher, that's McKeel, my sister in Elmsdale, Steve's mom. She was a teacher, and my brother married a teacher, but the rest of them went off in different fields, and Donald stayed home for quite a while, and then he got married to a school teacher, and they moved to Truro here, and he worked as a welder for one of the truck companies in here. I know his name, but I can't tell you. So Gordon and Walter became certified auto mechanics. Gordon, especially Gordon, wrote the exam with about 5 or 7 other guys in Halifax, maybe, I'm not sure where, and he came second, and his mark was 95, and the other guy was 96.5 in Yarmouth.
Wow.
And my brother said his was 95. I mean, we grew up with gears in our head, so it just came natural to understand stuff. It was in 1977, I think, I started flying. And in 1979, I got my license. And 1980, I got a divorce. Two don't mix. Well, I flew in the Avenger on the aircraft down there, and that was my first time up in an airplane. And I just loved it. Do you see the pictures of the airport there, the white runways? That's the ones I took out of the TBF Avenger. I knew what flying was about and how it felt, and you just felt like a bird. But I did a lot of work in between. That was in 1960, 67, 78. But I had quite a number of years of working. I had my store going then and everything. So I was a busy guy. People were so good to me that after the divorce I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown, and I just couldn't work anymore. And the people around there upped their projects and called me to get me going, and they talked to themselves and they said, we got to get that guy away, the hell away from him, get him working. So I'd get calls, and the first thing I was so damn busy I didn't have time to think about living alone, and they'd always give me stuff to bring home. And it just, that's one great thing about living in the country. I've been here 6 years, and I just barely know the guy next door there, and the one over there that's, I know their names, that's about it. You just don't know them. They're not interested in you. And as I grew and expanded my business, I knew the people all the way out through to West Gore practically. Mm-hmm. A lot of them I knew, but I didn't know them, but I knew them. And the same with up and down the shore. I could name you, tell you who was there and who wasn't. Yeah. If you give me a name, I can tell you that they never ever grew up down there from back then. Of course, now they're all new names. People move, dying, new people move in. In 1938, when we got our first electricity in, the guy from Elmsdale, I can say his name, but I won't for the moment, he came over and he wired the whole house, and from Elmsdale, $75. And I was about 8-year-old, I suppose, at that time. And so my sister, they finally, they put the meter upstairs. You go up the stairs, around here, and in here, and there's a bed in there, and you had to pull the bed out, and they put the meter up there, and the switch box, 4 fuses, just a square like this with a meter. So if they wanted to read the meter, they had to come in the front door, come up there and climb up on the bed, or pull the bed out in order to read the meter. Anyway, that was fine. So eventually we got it downstairs, and then I took over and put a new one in. But the thing that I wanted to tell you was when the electricity first was turned on, Norma and I were all together, so we were going around pulling the pull chains. No switches, just all pull chains, except in the hallway and upstairs was a 3-way switch. I didn't know what a 3-way switch was, it was just a thing in the wall. So I said, I'll go upstairs and we'll do it. So I'd turned on, she'd turned off. I'd turned on, she'd turned off. I said, how's that possible? So I went down and I said, Norma, I'm going to put my foot, the stairway is here and the switch is right over here. And I said, I'm going to put my foot here, and when I say go, you turn the switch on, I'm going to see if I can get up there ahead of the electricity. Really? I didn't make it. We tried it 2 or 3 times. Norma, I don't know how that's happened. Oh my God. We laugh about that even yet. It's so stupid. Oh my God, it was just like sunshine coming in, a new moon or something.
Yeah.
So we were pretty comfortable. We were pretty... That winter, before the electricity was all hooked up, they dug poles by hand all the way from Knoll to Maitland. In the winter time, they had guys going with pipe bars and stuff, and they had the shovel that comes down like this with the 90-degree thing. Then instead of going like this, they put it down the hole and go around and poke it down and bring it up and dump them. And then they had a pole line there. They brought that, they must have had a truck of some kind to drag the poles. So they dropped a pole off at every hole from the wind. They used dynamite sometimes because it was frosters to be down the ground about like this. I don't know why they chose the winter time. Unemployment insurance, maybe. 4 guys to a crew, and they'd get the pole dragged over and up against the hole and put a plank down the hole, about that high. Put that up against there, and then they'd all raise the pole up, and then they'd have a pike pole with a sharp spike on the end of it. They'd have 4 of those, and then each guy'd keep going, pushing, drop down in the hole. Then this cross arm, I don't know whether they even had any cross arms at that time or not. If they had to turn it, they did, but then tamped it all down, moved on, did the next one, and it took all winter to then put, I don't know how many people, it must have been 40 people working, and I don't know who paid them. I think it was the Nova Scotia Light and Power in Windsor, because Mr. Parks ran a generator up the lake road, you know. He had that pond up there. He built a windmill up there, or water mill, and powered it down. I don't know where he got the equipment, I have no idea. But he ran down and he in an electrician from Knoll, and I know his name too. And they wired them, and they hooked a lot of houses up through the village. So then the Nova Scotia Light and Power started taking over the places, and they bought it out from him. I think he did quite well on it. Gave him a job for the rest of his life, doing nothing but Merrill. And the guy in Knoll was, I know his name too. You'll understand when you get my age. It just lit up Knoll, and he was a marvel. I don't know what to charge. I'm sure he must have. But at that time, $1 would go a long way. So then he sold out to the Nova Scotia Light and Power, and they ran a line from Walton up through there and out to Kennecook to the school, and didn't wire too many places between Knoll and Kennecook. They wanted to get the power out to the school. And then they finally ran it up to Maitland in 1938.